I just went hands-on with Huawei's recently launched MateBook X Pro laptop. It's a Windows-powered machine in an Ultrabook form factor with a stunning 13.9-inch 3x2 minimal bezel display. Should Apple fans be jealous? The most notable part of Huawei's MateBook X Pro is its glossy 13.9-inch 260 ppi 3000 by 2000 display. This display provides a 91% screen-to-body ratio, which looks stunning. I've noticed that the MateBook's display sports better off-axis viewing angles than the MacBook Pro, and its 450 nits of brightness falls just short of Apple's machine. Huawei's colors appear a little bit more saturated than you'll find on the MacBook Pro, which some users may prefer or some users may not, depending on what type of work you do. The bottom line is that the MateBook's display makes the MacBook Pro appear dated. Hopefully Apple's next iteration of its flagship laptop addresses this. The MateBook X Pro also features a touchscreen, which, no pun intended, is a touchy subject around Apple circles when it comes to their laptops. I personally wouldn't use a touchscreen on a traditional laptop that often, but having the ability to do so is nice to have anyway. To pull off the reduced bezel look, Huawei had to move the camera to a different spot. No, it's not at the bottom of the display like some Windows laptops. Instead though, it's hidden underneath a key on your keyboard. Like, seriously. I like the privacy benefits that this brings to the table, but let's face it, it's a pretty horrible spot for a camera. The MateBook X Pro is like a modern take on the MacBook Pro, almost like a mix between the 12-inch MacBook and the current generation MacBook Pro. Huawei even uses polished chamfered edges on its laptop, a design that Apple has used for its iPhones and iPads, but never for its Mac lineup. It's a good-looking laptop, although when closed, the chamfered edges cause the MateBook X Pro to appear a little bit more busy than Apple's laptop. The overall build quality of the MateBook X Pro is impressive. The unibody teardrop taper design looks great, and I actually prefer Huawei's take on space gray. Yes, they shamelessly call it that, even though it happens to be a fingerprint magnet. Where the MateBook X Pro isn't as impressive is in its aluminum density. Although I'm incapable of really intelligently explaining why, the MacBook Pro's aluminum feels better to the touch and feels, I don't know, more dense and less hollow than the material on Huawei's machine. By now, Apple's butterfly switch-driven keyboard woes are no secret. Some people love the MacBook Pro's keyboard, but count me in the camp that prefers keys with more perceptible key travel. The MateBook X Pro's keys are more satisfying to type on and won't have the same sort of reliability issues that have plagued the MacBook's keyboard. That said, I love the MacBook Pro's individually backlit keys. It's a small detail, but one that makes the MacBook Pro appear more premium than the MateBook X Pro. The Force Touch-enabled trackpad, on the other hand, is something that Apple continues to excel at. It's not that Huawei's trackpad is bad, but it doesn't feel as responsive as the MacBook Pros. For example, there are dead zones near the top of the MateBook X Pro trackpad, while you can click anywhere on the MacBook's trackpad and it responds in uniform. The base model 13-inch MacBook Pro that I'm testing here lacks a fingerprint sensor, which is unfortunate given how useful it can be. To get a fingerprint sensor on the MacBook Pro, you have to step up to more expensive touch bar enabled models, a feature that, as you guys know, I have never really cared for at all. But even the base model Huawei MateBook X Pro includes a Windows Hello compatible fingerprint sensor built into the power button. The fingerprint sensor is fast, it's responsive, unlocking the Windows lock screen in less than a second. The MateBook X Pro ships with a quad speaker setup featuring 2 top-firing tweeters and 2 bottom-firing woofers. The speakers sound decent, but I feel like the MacBook Pro offers cleaner, crisper sound on the high end, which is obviously the most important thing since low-end frequency is basically non-existent in this form factor. Huawei offers different configurations for the MateBook X Pro, but the configuration that I'm using is the top-of-the-line $1,500 version. Now that includes an 8th generation Core i7 quad-core processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512 gigabytes of storage, and a discrete GPU. When you compare a similarly priced MacBook Pro, you can see that the MateBook X Pro offers a whole lot of value. Even if you are willing to throw money at Apple and upgrade your 13-inch MacBook Pro to its max configuration, you could only get a 7th generation Intel i7 dual-core processor at the moment. Now, both machines do sport a 15-watt TDP, which means more aggressive throttling, but the MateBook X Pro is definitely the more agile machine of the two, CPU, and base models even come equipped with quad-core i5 processors. To test CPU performance, I ran a couple of synthetic benchmarks using Cinebench R15 and Geekbench 4. Unsurprisingly, the MateBook X Pro bested the MacBook Pro in both CPU tests. However, something to keep in mind, when the MateBook X Pro isn't connected to power, the CPU performance is throttled down significantly. If you want the best performance out of Huawei's machine, you're going to want to be connected to power. The MacBook Pro performed just the same whether connected to power or while running on battery. Another big differentiator between these two machines involves graphics. The 13-inch MateBook X Pro comes with discrete NVIDIA graphics as well as internal UHD 620 graphics from Intel. The discrete GeForce MX 150 isn't going to blow you away with its performance, but it's adequate enough to play games at a decent frame rate and gives you built-in CUDA acceleration for apps in Adobe's CC Suite. The MacBook Pro, on the other hand, outright lacks a discrete GPU option for the 13-inch model. I fired up Rocket League on the MateBook X Pro with the default settings and was able to enjoy gameplay at a silky smooth 60 frames per second. Trying to do the same thing on the MacBook Pro yielded frame rates closer to 30 frames per second, and even that was erratic and choppy. The MateBook X Pro also comes with 2 USB-C ports, and one of them is Thunderbolt 3 enabled for attaching things like external GPUs. I tested the machine with the Razer Core X eGPU mated with an AMD Radeon RX Vega 64, and as expected, graphic performance obviously benefited a whole lot over the built-in GPUs. No surprises here, but Windows has much better graphics performance in games and synthetic benchmarks when compared to macOS. Comparing both machines using external GPUs yielded much better results on the MateBook X Pro when compared to the MacBook Pro. Some of that has to do with the 8th gen quad-core processor, but I've witnessed better performance when using Windows Boot Camp on the Mac as well. Sadly, the MateBook X Pro lacks an SD card reader, which would have definitely earned it some points in my eyes, but it does come with a 3.5mm headphone connection and a USB-A port on the right side of the machine. Huawei includes a 65-watt power brick and USB charging cable inside the box, which is similar to what you'll find bundled with the MacBook Pro. And in recognition that dongle life is a thing, Huawei supplies its Core i7 users with a USB-C dongle in the box for connecting to USB-A, VGA, HDMI, along with pass-through charging. The inclusion of VGA, useful for projector presentations, shows that Huawei thinks that a lot of business users will be snatching these machines up. Briefly touching on flash storage, the MateBook X Pro storage speeds best the MacBook Pro on single read/write tests, with read speeds that usually beat the MacBook Pro over a sustained period of time. However, sustained write speeds on the MateBook X Pro don't hold up nearly as well, consistently performing below that of the MacBook Pro. When it comes to battery, Huawei advertises up to 12 hours of battery life with certain testing restrictions, but I established my own test to compare these two machines as fairly as I could given the limited amount of time available. All tests featured the following parameters, as you can see here. The first test was an offline video playback test. I used a 4K video on both machines and looped it continuously until both machines died. And as you can see, both performed well, with each registering over 10 hours of offline video playback. In the second test, I streamed our iPhone and iPad YouTube playlist featuring nearly 200 videos over Wi-Fi. Both machines died before making it to the end of the playlist, but the results were still pretty good. In the online video test, the MateBook X Pro performed better, garnering nearly 10 hours of online video playback versus the MacBook Pro's 9 hours. Battery life will obviously be worse for both machines under load, and much depends on the type of apps being used, how long they're used, etc. In other words, battery tests are largely subjective, but under strict rules, both machines do pretty well. Despite iOS being Apple's primary focus, I still think that macOS is far superior to Windows in both basic functionality, utilities, and applications. There's a certain level of polish found on macOS that you just don't get on Windows machines, though admittedly, Microsoft has done a much better job in the last few years. That being said, I can understand why a large swath of the population prefers Windows, especially those that are into gaming. Games have traditionally performed better on Windows-based machines, partly because developers directly target the platform's technologies. But the bottom line is that the MateBook X Pro runs Windows. If that's okay with you, then you'll have a great time with this machine, but if you're a fan of macOS, it's highly unlikely that you'd be willing to compromise on such a key area, regardless of how impressive the hardware is. The conclusion is this: the MateBook X Pro makes the MacBook Pro look very outdated from a design perspective, and its performance to price ratio does likewise. PC makers have come a long way over the last few years, and products like the MateBook X Pro make that an undeniable truth. There was a time when some people thought the MacBook Pro was the best laptop for Windows, via Boot Camp of course, but that's certainly no longer the case. This is is compounded by the fact that Apple simply isn't putting as much effort into boot camp as of late. Yet the MateBook X Pro, like any other PC laptop, is only as good as your desire to run Windows. If you hate Windows, then even the most beautifully designed, forward-thinking laptop is still hindered by its OS of choice. But not everyone wants or even needs a Mac OS, and for those people, the MateBook X Pro is a seriously compelling laptop. Here's hoping that Apple is taking notes about where laptop design is headed and slims down those thick bezels, fixes the keyboard, ditches unnecessary add-ons like the touch bar, and focuses on creating a top-performing and good-looking new laptop. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments section. This is Jeff with 9to5 Mac.